also be marking International Albinism Day. The watchdog starts now. Let's get into our top story tonight. The High Court in Johannesburg has delivered judgment in an application brought by the Centre for Applied Legal Studies, CALS, on behalf of the Right to Know campaign, the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee, and community leader Keith Duarte. Now, this application challenged the City of Johannesburg's practice of charging protest conveners a fee to allow them to exercise their right to protest. The South African Human Rights Commission intervened as a friend of the court to emphasize how the policy does not comply with international law. Perhaps for more, joining us now to discuss is Stembiso Goluse, and the program's organizer from Right to Know campaign, and Tandega Kati, who is an attorney at the Centre for Applied Legal Studies. Well, very good evening to the both of you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Watchdog. Stembiso, let me perhaps begin with you. Obviously, looking at the irony of this all, the protesters that you often represent are people who are poor. They don't have access to resources. They cannot afford such fees. And we also understand that the ability to protest is a constitutional right. I wonder if you could just give us your reaction. How do you receive the judgment?
Well, good evening and thanks for having me. As the Right to Know campaign, this is a great victory for us. We are very happy with the judgment, and we also appreciate us for standing on our side. You know, this judgment is very important for people in South Africa, especially those who want to protest and want to hold the state accountable. You know, over the years, we have these challenges of this limitation of rights, especially when it comes to right to protest. And as we have said, people on the ground, they are poor. They can't afford to pay these fees, which are unreasonable, and also they are unconstitutional. You know, so this is a great victory. People can now go and protest, exercise their rights, call for accountability when necessary, without having these limitations when it comes to protest. Because, you know, this victory is not only for us as an organization, but for every individual who wants to exercise their rights of gatherings. And also, in the general view, when it's come to the right protest, it's been a challenge, you know, especially when it's come to these municipalities using these bylaws to make sure that they frustrate everyone who wants to protest. Because it's not only in Johannesburg, but in other cities, they use different tactics when it comes to defining people their right to protest. So it is a great victory indeed, and at least this time our will of justice are on our side, and we are very happy.
Let me bring Tandega back into the conversation. Tandega, if you can hear me, good evening. I believe that you're joining us via telephone tonight. We've just heard from Stembiso, you know, how they've received the judgment. And I wonder if you could outline the merits of the case and perhaps walk us through how you received the judgment today.
Thank you so much for having me, Liesl, and a very good evening to you. CALS welcomes the judgment. It's a great victory, as Stembiso has said, you know, for the right to protest in South Africa. I think as a matter of walking you through the case, the main issue here was the charging of fees by the City of Johannesburg as a precondition to the exercise of the right to protest, which the High Court had declared to be unconstitutional. We will know that the City of Johannesburg relied upon a policy, you know, to charge these fees. So they didn't rely on legislation, and they also didn't rely on the Constitution. So the Constitution in Section 17 clearly states that everyone, you know, has the right to protest, and so does the Regulation of Gatherings Act. And neither of them asked for a fee. So the court found that, you know, this policy is ultra vires the Regulations of Gatherings Act, as well as the Constitution. Because, yes. And the court also reminded, you know, the City of Johannesburg and JMPD that ours is a participatory democracy, and the right to protest is pivotal in exercising our other constitutional rights. It was in the past, and it still is today. And the JMPD had argued that the fees or the levies that they charge help with traffic control. But the court reminded them that traffic control is one of the core functions, as the JMPD, so they cannot charge people or conveners for that. So all in all, we are very excited about this judgment and we welcome it.
Sandeka, what did those, the fees look like? Perhaps for protesters, I believe there was a different rate for NGOs as well. I'm asking you this also because I wonder if you could also backtrack a little bit and look at where these claims, stem back to. If I am correct, is from the 23rd of October 2020. Maybe you can clarify that for us because the South African Human Rights Commission obviously came on board as a friend of the court.
So our understanding is that this policy came as a result of a resolution in 2011, so that's where it came from. That's where it originated from. The requirement to pay fees.
All right. I wonder then, just before I bring Stembiso back into the conversation, was this only limited to the city of Johannesburg? Or, have there been other parts of the country that have been charging exorbitant fees or fees for that matter during protests? So walk us through that context as well.
So what was very interesting about this case is that through our research, we found that the city of Johannesburg, in our opinion, is one of the only cities in South Africa that charges fees before a person can exercise the right to protest.
All
so
right.
It was very unique to the Johannesburg setting.
All right, so it's going to be interesting to see how it then sets the precedents going forward. I wonder, as your arguments, were put forth, are you aware of any other protesters or prospective protesters who were denied the right to protest because they couldn't afford these fees, and the implications of that to date?
So I think even our clients, the issue was the affordability. Because as you mentioned before, these fees were not fixed, so they would vary. Some people would be charged anything as little as 200 and something rands, while others were charged like up to 10,000 rands. So you can understand how this would be a deterrent for people to proceed to protest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder with, the case, with you obviously winning the case, how soon does the city of Johannesburg have to pay the legal costs for this case? What happens if they do not pay as requested? What do those scenarios look like?
Okay, so far, the judgment or the unconstitutionality of the policy was effective as of the 10th of June, so last week Friday. So going forward, the city of Johannesburg can no longer expect fees from our conveners. In terms of the right to know receiving costs for the case, that is an ongoing process that can take anything from a month to a year. So it's an ongoing back and forth between the attorneys about rates and so on and so forth.
All right, Cindy, so let me bring you back into the conversation. Obviously, you from a Right to Know campaign. I wonder, in your journey with the organization, are you aware of any prospective protesters or protesters for that matter who were denied the right to protest because they could not afford the fees? Perhaps what precedents do you think this sets going forward for the most vulnerable and marginalized in the country to exercise their constitutional rights?
Yeah, there have been some communities, especially grassroots communities and some community organizations, who have tried before to protest and they were denied because they couldn't afford to pay fees. I think that is one of the reasons, because as Right to Know, also advocates for the right to protest. So smaller organization and community organization will also come to us for assistance. And we have realized that this is becoming an issue when they are trying to go to the streets and protest. So that is why we've even taken up this case and reach out to CALS, because even ourselves, at some point, they wanted to deny us the right to protest and wanted to charge us. And then we said, no, we are going ahead to understand our rights. It's on the Gatherings Act, so you can't do this to us. But you know what they usually do? They will limit the protection, they limit the services from the police. And that puts people who are protesting at risk, because they are no longer protected. At some point, even if they don't deny you these rights, they will let you go on the streets, but they will deem your protest as being illegal. especially in the city of Johannesburg, as my colleague has mentioned, who have been frustrated when they want to take it to the streets.
All right. I want to thank you both for your time here tonight, perhaps just giving us perspective upon that judgment. The High Court in Johannesburg having delivered judgment in an application brought by the Centre for Applied Legal Studies on behalf of the Right to Know campaign, the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee, and of course community leader Keith Duarte. Again, thank you very much to Stembiso Koluse, the program's organizer from Right to Know campaign, and Tandega Kati, attorney at the Centre for Applied Legal Studies. Let's quickly take a quick ad break and continue with more news and updates on the other side. You're watching The Watch. Continues with myself, Liesl Wilson, of course, standing in for my colleague, Vuyo Mvoko. And other news, MPs working on processing the electoral amendment bill will meet right through Parliament's recess period to finalise this legislation. Parliament has been granted a 6-month extension by the Constitutional Court to pass this bill into law. However, critics of the bill in its current form say it still does not go far enough to give voters the chance to elect their chosen representatives.
In 2020, the Court ruled the Electoral Act to be unconstitutional in that it didn't allow independent candidates to contest national and provincial elections. It gave Parliament a deadline of 24 months to amend the law. That deadline was last Friday, the same day that the Court granted Parliament its request of a 6-month extension.
We've further made an application to continue with the work during recess so that we deal with this process extensively. Secondly is that it will allow the NCOP to also further deliberate and look on this electoral amendment bill once the National Assembly has considered and recommended and referred the further processing to the NCOP.
An impression is being created that the fact that we are not ready with this bill is threatening the national elections in 2024. And I don't see in what way it is threatening the elections. According to the report which I have received from the legal team, I know that we are really gunning for the 6th of November to finalize this whole thing. And therefore, if we finish and the president signs, then we will not have a problem if we are able to do it in the next 6 months.
But one South African movement's Musi Maimane says this bill still favours political parties over independent representatives.
And so a 6-month extension, once granted by the Constitutional Court, will mean that Parliament will sign into law a bill that still does not achieve for people to vote for their members of Parliament directly, get to know who represent them on issues of health, education, crime, and furthermore, ensure that accountability for issues such as state capture is felt across the entire political practice.
Other critics agree with Maimane, saying the bill currently does not give independent candidates an adequate opportunity as they are restricted to contest for only 200 of the 400 seats in the National Assembly. Supporters of the bill want all 400 members to be elected through a constituency-based system. Parliament anticipates the bill will be sent to the President in September for assent, giving him enough time to study it and send it back to the institution if he has any concerns. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
Joining us now to discuss further, we're joined by Dr. Levi Ndau. Good evening to you, Dr. Levi. Thank you for joining us here on the Watchdog tonight.
Good evening to you, Liesl. Good evening to the viewers at home. Thank you for having me.
We've just seen the context being set by Abra Barbia, our reporter, and I wonder if you could highlight, how this electoral amendment bill, in fact, highlights the impact of politics on lawmaking. What's unfolding on that front?
Well, I think it's important to note that the Electoral Act, before it was declared unconstitutional, it only